Welcome back to Brothers of the Arcana. I am Alex Aldea.
I am co-host Dave Ferrigno, and today's guest, we have Randy Sanders joining us from Missouri.
Thank you for joining us, Randy.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. So, Randy, why don't we start off a little bit by you introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about what you have. We've been friends for a while, but for the folks that don't know, who is Randy Sanders?
I am a Freemason from Missouri. I am a contemplative practitioner. I am a farmer right now, and have focused recently on simplifying my life. I do a lot of varied things. I just came out of the East in one of the fraternal orders to which we belong, and so I'm kind of decompressing after my year as a leader role there. I am a librarian in the Scottish Rite in the Valley of St. Louis. A brother and I co-head or co-chair the library committee there. And I'm an educator. I enjoy doing any kind of educational work, focusing on creating the education, working with others to create their education, delivering education. And a lot of my education right now and what I'm trying to bring to people is more of the contemplative work, more of the finding of the self, finding of the hidden or inner pieces within each of us that this world's kind of lacking right now. So that's kind of where Randy is right now.
It's a beautiful thing, and
certainly is.
I love the sentiment. Randy works with and also under the auspices of Chuck Dunning, famous author and also Freemason, among other organizations that we're all a part of. We're going to have Chuck on the show as well, which I'm very excited about.
Awesome.
But if Dave, do you want to kick us off with our first question of the day?
Absolutely. And for those that are uninitiated, the East, what Randy was alluding to, is the position of leadership, that you are the top of the food chain, so to speak. And not to say that, you're eating anybody or anything like that. You're just a leader. You're the president, so to speak, or CEO, and operating the organization that you're a part of. So, Randy, just kicking this right off, what does it mean to be enlightened and understanding enlightenment today?
Wow, what a deep question. So, besides going on for years and years and years with voluminous books written about exactly that kind of thing, enlightenment is considered by many, and let's just go with that, considered by many to be an awakening to your own personal self, awakening to the world that you live in a much deeper sense, and connecting with that world on many different levels. Enlightenment also, depending on your source, your tradition, your authors, also focuses toward deity. There is no enlightenment without some form of connection with deity. And that is the true mystics of the world. And I consider myself to be studying to be a mystic. I don't know that I'm that far along. But the mystics of the world look at this from a position of connectedness with each other, and that spark that or flame or light that's within us. I mean, every mystic culture or tradition has some form of that. The perfect cubical stone, the alchemical stone, the philosopher's stone, all of the different things that have been alluded to. Templars call it the Grail. Everybody's searching for something. Everybody's searching for the Holy Grail. Everybody's searching for the perfect ashlar. Somebody's working on their own, trying to find the flame. But that flame, that connection from all of these different traditions, is the connectedness that the mystics call enlightenment.
Fantastic. Well,
Let me
appreciate that explanation. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dave. I will say we're going to do the cigar of the day. Speaking of enlightenment, we should do. I'm smoking the Los Calaveras. That's the Crown Heads version right there. Boom. Oh, it's getting lost in the Phantom Zone. There it is. Dave, what are you smoking?
Well, I guess I need to pull one out of the humidor over here, but
well, while you do that, Randy, how does one recognize if they have attained enlightenment? How do you know if you're enlightened? What if you just pass right by it and you go back to ignoramus?
We're all there. We're all there at that point. The tarot deck calls the magician and the fool the same thing. There's a few minor tweaks and differences, but if you look at the concept of the tarot, the initiate and the beginner are all the same. There is no difference. Mm-hmm. So enlightenment, can you connect with it and can you lose it? To some extent. Mm-hmm. Can you connect with it and stay connected with it 100% of the time? Well, that would be a pretty amazing thing. Most people get flashes of insight. Most people can connect through mindfulness or meditation or a contemplative focus on connecting with that enlightenment or the connectedness with everybody around them for smaller and then larger periods of time. Some people are really gifted and are probably enlightened not far after birth. That's a very good question. I would say that in my own experience, it's been flashes. It continues to be flashes, larger and larger flashes, larger and larger pieces. When we refer to shadow work, that's not necessarily, facing your own demons and going through some kind of 12-step process to clear out all the bad stuff from your past. Now, there's probably a little bit of that too, but not as much as let me go with what Jung said and what a very wise teacher once told me, that the shadow is not necessarily the bad, evil stuff. The shadow is just your secondary part of your consciousness or yourself or something that's out there, whatever you want to call that. Let me come back to that in a minute. But that intuition that's telling you, don't go down that road. Don't be taking that 15th shot of bourbon. You don't need to be picking yourself up off the floor after the 5th shot of tequila or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. But that intuition is telling you something. Or maybe there's a connectedness that comes in with that intuition that says, you know what? You were thinking about horses 3 weeks ago, and yesterday you were talking about wagons, and now you've got a horse and a wagon. And that insight, that connectedness says, maybe I need to bridle it up, and now I've got a horse and wagon that I can use to do stuff. I don't know. Intuition plays in a really weird way. So the shadow, that shadow that talks to you, is your own mind, is your own consciousness, is your own connection out, the mystic connection out to everything else. That, according to Jung, that is allowing you to tap into that enlightened state. I'll go with that. Now, shadow, when it comes to Jung, is a very interesting thing. Jung wrote quite a bit about that. I am not a Jungian expert. I know a little bit about Jung. I know a little bit about some of these other mystic systems. Some of them don't call the shadow like Jung does. They refer to shadow as some pretty dark stuff, and they try to avoid it or they try to confront it, one of the two. And you pay attention to whoever you're speaking with and kind of find out what their tradition is telling you, because some of these traditions want to warn you in different ways that, hey, this path is a little more safe than the other path. Hey, you want to do this, don't want to do that. And it's important to understand that these differences amongst these different paths are important to you to start to absorb what these lessons are. These are all life lessons. How do I live a more moral life? How do I live a better life? How do I connect with nature? How do I connect with other people in a better way that makes me better too? And, as long as you're focused on doing good and especially giving gratitude back for what you've received, you're in a pretty safe space. When you get into some of the other paths, and I'm going to go with, it's my understanding that some of these other paths, you really want to pay attention to what your teacher's telling you. So
Randy, from that,
yeah,
I was going to say, from an esoteric and some of the spiritual traditions, I think there's obviously that concept of dark forces and negative entities. And I think, from my understanding, there's always been these internal forces like the ego, self-doubt, temptation. But then there's also the external forces like these negative influences. Maybe it's your teacher, maybe it's people, maybe it's energetic interference. So from that perspective, what would you say, if somebody's getting into meditation and mindfulness, how can they block out those negative influences and stop, maybe going down a rabbit hole you shouldn't be, maybe following your intuition as you were alluding to, or whatever else?
Interesting. That's a good question. There may be a perception that this negative influence or these outside negative influences are affecting you. The reality is most of this, I'm going to say most, is within you. All right. If you're feeling a negative emotion, a negative intent, a negative impact, something is negative, the first question you should probably be asking is, beyond why, is, where is this coming from? And always look in a mirror figuratively, look in a mirror when you're saying that. What part of me is this negative piece coming from? Do I have a fear about this? Going back to the horse and wagon or horse and buggy kind of concept, do I have a fear of horses? I thought about horses, I thought about wagons, I put them together, I've got a horse and buggy, whatever it is. But do I have an unnatural fear of horses? Do I have a fear of being run over by wheels? I don't know. I'm making this up, but it's the allegory is what is within that I'm bringing to the surface. Now, this can also be some of that shadow work that we're talking about, and the concept of the negative emotions or negativity that comes up, maybe a past experience. Maybe you did get your foot stepped on by a horse. That's no fun, by the way. And if maybe you did get your foot run over by a wagon when you weren't paying attention to it, or your little brother pushed you down the hill a little too quickly or something. I don't know. But the point to what you're saying, I think, also might be rephrased, and allow me to ask.
Absolutely.
Is there a way to protect yourself while you're doing these meditations? Am I kind of cluing into that a little bit? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The ways to protect yourself are to form a sacred space around you. We haven't talked about sacred spaces yet. I do a little presentation on one. Ben Wallace does a fantastic presentation on one. There's some Chuck Dunning, we mentioned a few moments ago, has a couple of sections in his book, Rosecroix Oratory. Fantastic book, by the way.
Just got that, by the way. Awesome stuff. Yeah.
He has some really good direction in kind of creating sacred space. There's a little bit more to it than that. I'm not going to dive deep into that. That's Chuck's territory, and he's phenomenal at explaining.
We'll ask him about that, no question. I also have that in my upcoming book that I'm writing about sacred spaces and how they sort of...
Fantastic.
Yeah, and if you want to just give us a high level of sacred spaces before you get into that thought, maybe that would be great for our listeners.
Okay. When we create a sacred space, we're literally doing that. We're invoking deity to come with us, to be with us, to be around us, to surround us and be there. Now, in pretty much every tradition that I know, deity is all around us all the time. If let's just for ease, let's go with Christianity. Know ye not that ye are the temple of God. God is with you in every space, every way, every filament of your being, every area between the molecules that we're breathing. God's everywhere. God is everywhere. God is everything. We are a part of God. God is reflected within us. God is a reflection of us. That Bible doesn't say that exactly, but go look it up. And I think you'll be surprised, especially some of the Old Testament writings where the prophets are talking about God. I think you'll be really surprised at what you read.
Well, what does the end of Matthew say, right? So be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. And exactly. He even says, I am the least among you. You can all do what I have done. So all of this kind of stuff leads to understanding that maybe he was here to be more of a brother to us rather than a father to us in that sense. He was sort of lead the way to say, what I'm doing, you guys can be doing too.
And there's a whole lot of truth to that. And I'm deeply appreciative of what you just said. Where we go with this in the sacred space is that we're creating a space that is separate from ourselves, our outside world, our connectedness to the world. We're setting it aside, that space, and creating an area in which we control the elements. I set the air conditioner to 65 degrees because I want to be cold, and I set the music or no music to whatever level. I control every aspect of that space. And the easy way for me to do it is I just think about what would it feel like if I could actually feel the walls from my chair right here. What would it feel like if my shoulders could feel the walls or my head could feel the ceiling, my butt could feel the floor. It's already in a seat, but what could it, hit the floor? And in expanding my consciousness to those walls and the ceiling and floor pushes out any negativity. That's one of the ways I do it. There's many different ways. Israel Regardie describes an interesting way of doing this in his book, The Middle Pillar. There's, like I said, I already referred to Chuck and his book. Alex, I'm really looking forward to reading your book.
Thank you. I am really looking forward to finishing it.
So a lot of this, a lot of creating the sacred space sets the control to the area that you're going to be in. Then you consecrate it by saying, I'm making this a holy space. I mean, the intent is as important as the words. You don't have to go look up some kind of 16th century grimoire to find out how somebody did this kind of stuff. Your intent is the most important piece, and you really focus on, I'm going to make this a sacred space. If you want to burn some incense, if that's your thing, burn incense. If you're going to open a holy book, whatever religion that you focus on in your holy book, and make that a part of your sacred space, then by golly, do it. That's the important part of what we're doing here. And then you set everything up. You've got some kind of focus going on, and you invite deity to come in with you. Easy as saying, please be with me. Create that sacred space. Create that space and focus on that connection with deity. Even for that moment, it's a very powerful thing. Now we've created our sacred space. Now we have invited deity to be in with us, to work with us, to be happy that we are being happy ourselves. I personally am a big fan of gratitude. Another one of my very favorite teachers not too long ago connected gratitude with the virtues. And gratitude is a path to all 7 virtues. And I thought, how come I never thought of that? How cool is that? So I always say a prayer of gratitude. I say a prayer of gratitude when I wake up in the mornings. I say a prayer of gratitude when I'm creating this sacred space in which I'm going to contemplate or reflect or meditate or just keep just an open mind, a quiet, still mind. There's lots of ways to do that, or just to pray. A lot of people use prayer for their contemplative work, and there are books written by saints over the years through the church on different ways of praying. How cool is that? So I'm going to stop there for a minute.
Could gratitude be the polar opposite of pride? Just pride is the king of the sins, so to speak. Gratitude could be the queen of the virtues, let's call it, and as such is the gateway to the rest of the virtues.
To have true gratitude is to open your heart and appreciate, truly allow appreciation to become part of your being. And that is an outward reflection to everything, but it's also an inward reflection. I would say pride, along with ego, a self-centered ego. Yeah, I could see that.
Interesting.
That would be a really good question for Chuck. Not to put him on the spot, but
he's getting it. Don't worry.
Yeah, we'll definitely put him on the spot.
This is a very interesting discussion here, because when you have the ego and when you have the you don't see a whole lot of gratitude. I think you're onto something there. I think that's correct.
Because we normally think of love, right? But love, if you look at the Babylonians, they had 20 different or 50 different words for love. The later on, the Jews, the Greeks, ancient Greeks had a bunch of different words for love. We only have one word that says love. We're not considering fraternal love, filial love, amorous love, eros, agape, as the Greeks call it, that sort of thing. It's like, how does all that, how do you activate those types of love? Probably through gratitude in those various flavors, I'm guessing.
I think gratitude and also positive mindset, and obviously transforming that overall thought process, right? If you're keeping positive thoughts, you're going to yield positive results.
Certainly.
When there's another very good statement, what you put out into the universe comes back to you. And what you give to God, deity, your faith, whatever that faith is, there's somewhere in there in your holy scriptures that says something about being putting good thoughts or good prayers or good things out there so that you can receive them many times back. Everybody has a different way of saying that, but it's true. The Buddhists, very interesting difference in some of their teachings, live from a point of sorrow and are grateful for what is not sorrow that comes back to them. It's an interesting kind of reversal in that, but if you go deep enough, it's not a reversal. It's still putting good things out there and, looking for the good that comes back, appreciating and celebrating the good that comes back. Now, maybe it's a bit cynical of them to go from the sorrow side of the house, but I really and deeply appreciate Buddhism. I'm not Buddhist, but I appreciate it. And I'm not making fun of them in any way, shape, or form. I think that it's just an odd twist that is, when you go down to the deepest roots, it still shows gratitude and the expressive desire to see good. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Are you saying sorrow because they say life is suffering?
Yes.
I read a different interpretation of that, which said life is disappointment. which again it gets there. It's a little bit different flavor, right? A little different quality to that word. And they say that life, because it never meets the egoic expectation, right? We think it should be this, it ends up being this. Here's the suffering or disappointment that gets created between those two polar things. And when you attain, well, that's samsara. And then when you attain satori or nirvana or whatever it is, you've now linked your expectations and the world. So there's no more disappointment because you're just experiencing what is without any other metric for what you think it should be, kind of thing. Which I thought was very interesting, sort of eliminates that suffering out. But that brings me to a question that I had on persistent non-duality. There's a guy out there, Angelo DeLullo, wrote a book called Awake. Love to have him on the podcast sometime. But he's not the only one. He comes from the tradition of Adyashanti, who's written a lot of books on Buddhism. Again, it's like maybe a reinterpretation of Buddhism, a simplifying of certain paths, usually Zen Buddhism specifically. And his whole thing is when you wake up, because you said you had some awakening pulses. I have as well. Dave has as well. And we've all sort of struggled with that. So now we've had this. How do you get to where it's persistent, right? So now it's no longer a pulsing back and forth. You're in the new system. He appears to be, Eckhart Tolle appears to be, a bunch of these other guys appear to be, and I say appear to be because I have no evidence to say whether they're in it or not. So how does it show up for you? I mean, I know that's not strictly speaking your tradition, but I know you know something about it. And if you could talk about that, that'd be great.
Reframe the question maybe.
How does the idea, so we talked about enlightenment, persistent non-duality, maybe enlightenment, and maybe something on the way to enlightenment. How does that show up for you, this increasing of your capacity to, let's say, hold the enlightenment, right? So it doesn't slip out of your hands anymore. How does that showing up for you, and how is that making a difference in your life? Like, are challenges the same in life, or, how are you going about it? Has the world, your perception of it changed? That kind of thing.
So I often use the martial arts as a connection or use it as an example. And in this case, there is all combat veterans will know this immediately as soon as I say it. There's a situational awareness that happens in combat where everything narrows down to one point and you are focused on that one thing. And then it opens to everything. And out of the back of your skull, you can see or sense that a blade of grass is moving, and you need to be aware of that blade of grass because there's probably a sniper behind it or something. That awareness becomes a 360 degree, and you are completely immersed in the moment. Now, that situational awareness, if it goes a little too far and you're not in a position where you can understand or fully process it, can become PTSD or something similar. Again, not a psychiatrist, not a psychologist, no claims to be, but it can cause some real issues later on. You've opened something up, you got exposed to this really intense situation, and there's not a whole lot to prepare you for that kind of thing. All the training in the world is just going to tell you, put your head down and keep going forward. In the martial arts, there is an awareness. When I promoted people to instructor, they had to have that awareness. I had to be able to know that they had that same awareness. Mindfulness is the same kind of thing in a contemplative work, where you are 100% focused in the moment. Then it slips and we start daydreaming about Star Trek, whatever, doesn't matter what. And then, but we can bring it back. We can bring back that mind. We can start living in the moment again. The longer we live in the moment, the more that things open up to us. And if we focus on living in the moment, as we focus more on that moment piece, I think this is the same. Now, I don't know, I haven't read the books, but this seems to me what he's discussing, your author is discussing with being present, being in the moment, being consistently aware, constantly aware, constantly at one, because that one mindfulness is, I think that's where we're struggling, and me included. I think that's where we're struggling with the continued enlightenment or continued focus on non-duality, I believe is what you said. And that being one, non-duality is one, right? The singular focus, a singular mindfulness, a single mindset, opening yourself up and living completely in the moment, no daydreaming, no whatever.
Does that mean being God? Are we God then? Aha!
That's a really good question.
I think that's a big ego trap.
I think it is too. I think that now my particular contemplative practice, my journey, my own personal journey, is to get away from the ego. I just said my 2 or 3 times here. So it's really focused on how do I say these things? How do I express these things without coming across as being some kind of all-knowing guru? I'm not. I can express my experience, and I would love to share this experience and explain it. And how do I do that without saying silly analogies like horses and carts or martial arts or other things? It's just a way of connecting each other. Ego has a real problem in a lot of these orders that and organizations to which, well, we belong to some, but there's a lot of organizations out there. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these folks think about some of these officers who have served and then stepped down. Maybe their term in office is over. Me stepping down out of the East in my lodge, my local position here. How do I step down gracefully from that? How do I reintegrate back into the fraternal body gracefully?
Hard. It's hard.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I remember last year when it happened to me, and I stepped out of the East, and Dave has had 2 years in the East, and
yeah,
he can get into that if he wishes, but it's stepping down from there to be in chaplain. I remember being sort of like curled up in my chair and just saying, I don't know what to do with myself right now. Your phone stops ringing. You're not the problem solver anymore. They've already moved on to somebody else. The spotlight's off of you. And then it's like, well, I guess I got more life to live now and a lot more time to do stuff. And I'm only somewhat happy about it. So.
Well, I think that's where you need to embrace humility, right? To get rid of the ego and also reintegrate. And that's the entire point of enlightenment, right? Is reintegration with God or some kind of deity, whatever you believe in.
Humility, you say? What's that there now?
Well, go ahead, Randy. Sorry.
Oh, one of the ways that I started coping with this was about 6 months ago ish. I quit wearing pins.
Did you say pants?
I quit wearing pants too. No, I'm just kidding. No, the pins.
No, pants is the best pants.
A lot of these organizations have lapel pins or little decorations or what they call jewels, which are little designs on ribbons that you wear on your lapel or your jacket. And one of the funniest things that I saw almost probably several years ago was a little cartoon, a meme back in the day before they were called memes. this, that had a guy in an armor, had a big old plate mail armor helmet on, but his chain mail was made up of all the little pins from all the organizations that he belonged to. I laughed and laughed and laughed because we both know people who walk into state gatherings or state functions or national gatherings or functions. They look like they've got armor on because they've got so many pins and decorations and gold jewels and loops and necklaces and you name it. Well, we call them collars, but most people call them big necklaces.
Right.
And, how do you, some of these positions, some of these bodies that we belong to expect the folks that served to still wear all this bling, all of this gold, whatever, and the fancy pins and all these different things. And you look at that and you go, how much time does that take? Is that self-gratification or is that, is that really something that we need to do and focus on? And when we do that, does that set us apart? Why do we wear that stuff? The quick answer is, somebody's going to come up to you and ask you about that particular pin. Oh, yeah, right, sure. I don't know. That's happened a couple of times, not hundreds. So I quit wearing this stuff. I quit wearing pins. I still have collections. I love my collection of them. I think it's awesome. And, the collection is fantastic. I collect bourbons too, but I don't drink bourbon all the time. Well, maybe I should. But
with a nice cigar, like this little Calaveras that we were talking about earlier. Yes,
there you go.
Exactly.
My humidor is 4 feet from me. I'm with you.
There you go, Eddie. Dave, you got a burning question? Because I want to ask something else at the moment.
I wouldn't say a burning question, but I definitely want to, if we jump to, just talking about the mind-body connection when we, because I know you alluded to martial arts. We've had discussions in the past about Tai Chi and some other, Kung Fu and such. So we could jump into that in a minute since you have a burning question. If your pants are on fire, go ahead.
My pants are always on fire and all my questions are burning. So you very kindly, when I saw you several times ago, not this last time around, unhooked an impinging issue in my back, and I still appreciate that. It was an easy fix for you, but it was a long time pain for me. That actually spurred something in my mind vis-a-vis the book about sacred space, and that is, I wrote it for myself here. PTSD is crystallization of experience.
Wow.
And how do we use sacred space as a workshop to decrystallize that experience and to release it back instead of it being crept up in that crystallized space where it's stuck really there. I mean, just like with a muscular bundle, that can happen in our thoughts, that can happen in our experiences, I feel. And I think that's what PTSD is. What are your thoughts on how to, because obviously we're talking about, Dave said, mind-body connection, right? So with that mind-body connection, how do you on some level work to get that knot out, so to speak?
There exist several different modalities of, I'm going to call it decompression. Of ways of decompressing the individual, and some of those, especially the debriefing sessions that the military uses, they have very specific techniques that counselors use for decompression therapy. I'm using words that I'm not familiar with. I'm not a clinical psychologist nor a psychiatrist, so guys understand that I'll do the best that I can with this.
Sure.
I actually went through a little bit of this. I worked on a disaster team for a while, actually a couple of them, and one of the deployments was bad enough that we did have some need for counseling and debriefing. And that those sessions helped a lot. The combat veterans go through it, I don't know, 100 times worse than I ever did. And the ones that have, that need that, I think everybody needs a little bit of debriefing in some way, shape, or form. Whether that is, hanging out with your friends in a bar for a while to kind of put all the deal with all of these issues, then and that works for you, that's okay. But a lot of people need a little bit more than that. Mm-hmm. And substance abuse is not the right answer for it. To go back to sacred spaces, because the question was really towards that. How can we use that for our own self? Most traditions, most either esoteric traditions or fraternal organizations or whatever we're involved with, all the various myriad groups and activities and, social clubs, they all have some form of ritual. And that ritual is an opening and a closing, which could be as simple as jumping up, pledge of allegiance, a prayer, and, hey, I'm declaring this open, let's read minutes. It could be as complex as a full-blown opening of a Grand Lodge of Masons, which takes half a morning. Mm-hmm. And if you can stay awake through that, then, there's that ritual piece that is recited, the recitation of the ritual is working on a focused portion of the mind to open a sacred space. Okay, that was a very long way of me saying, use the ritual to which you've been initiated, to which you've been exposed to, whatever. That ritual, when done in that manner, in the manner you've been taught, is a means of opening a sacred space. Mm-hmm. So that right there, that structure gives you a foundation. I'm going to call it a foundation to build upon. And that foundation to build upon is, okay, now I've got this safe space. I've got this sacred space around me. I've got this structure that I can lean on. And I'm open. I've invited deity in. We're all good here. In some traditions, maybe you invite Archangel Michael to come sit beside you. I mean, I don't know. Some of these traditions kind of get pretty intense that way. But let's go with yes. And that all that stuff's happened. Now you've got time to think about stuff. Some of the traditions talk about when do you do the work? They don't tell you what the work is. They just say, when do you do the work? And some of these responses might be something like after 9 o'clock or after midnight or after whatever it is. Okay. There's an answer to that. Each tradition has their own, or each organization or whatever has their own way of responding to that kind of a question in their ritual. And when you start talking about that kind of thing, you find out most of it's after dark, when you're away from everybody else, when you're isolated and you can do it. So the work needs to be isolated. It's you alone. It needs to be done in a sacred space because you're creating that sacred space. And it needs to be something that is personal to you. It's your work that you're doing alone. So those three things right there tell me that there's a contemplative aspect to this. It's not just, I'm going to create this sacred space. Okay, my sacred space. Oh, look, there's a book that's out of place. It's not alphabetized. I need to go change that. What? No, it has nothing to do with books. It's internal. So the sacred space can be the limits and confines of your body. It doesn't have to be a room that you're putting together. The room or the space, or in some cases a cube of space. There's a book called The Cube of Space, I think. I'm spacing on the author's name. But they talk about building this room that you operate in. Operate? What kind of operate? that you're meditating in. All of this great work is all about contemplation, meditation, whatever. So that was a very long way of answering your question. You build a sacred space. You take that sacred space. Your work is the contemplative piece in there. Now, you're not going to be able to do much in the debriefing unless you're inviting somebody into that sacred space with you. But you can think about what that is and go through it and start trying to process it on your own. And then if you get into a bind and you go, oh, this is too much, I don't want to deal with this right now, you close that sacred space. I like to say release the energy back to the universe. I don't know, whatever you want to say. I know some traditions envision a big giant purple vortex and mentally throw the room and everything into that purple vortex to be reabsorbed. Is that a real thing? I don't know. Maybe it is. So you create the sacred space that gives you a foundation to work with, work in, a safe space to work in, and when you're ready to close it, you control the compartmentalization of your mind to that point where you go, okay, I can't deal with this right now. I don't want to bury it way deep, but I'm going to leave this kind of over here on the side of my desk so I can reach over and grab it and deal with it again. I don't want to put it down in a file cabinet way down deep that I'm not going to go get again. Mm-hmm. That's, again, I'm using an analogy of a desk for your mind. One of my teachers told me to do it that way. One of my teachers said that didn't make sense to him, so I don't know. I'll leave it at that.
From a perspective of PTSD, and this wouldn't be applicable to a combat veteran as an example, but I think one thing you alluded to, and I kind of felt, there's almost a journey of forgiveness that you need to forgive yourself, forgive others. And I think from a spiritual progression and an emotional healing perspective, I think it's really extremely important to, forgive yourself for some of your flaws, mistakes, get rid of that ego, get rid of, that mindset. You got to be humble. And when you're creating that sacred space, leave that negativity and energy and just push that out to the universe. Alex, I think you had a question before, if you wanted to jump into that.
Well, so one of the things, and I think maybe it may be a bias based on how you've been doing this type of work, Randy, but I wanted to throw in an opportunity to say, because you did address it a little bit, if you choose to invite somebody into this space. So we as Masons set up sacred spaces, and I'm not going to get too much into how we do that, but we do it communally, right? So it's not just doing the solo work, it's also doing communal work. Now, as an Orthodox Christian, as opposed to let's call it a charismatic evangelical Christian. Charismatic evangelicals say you need a personal relationship with God, right? With a personal relationship with Jesus. That's how that sort of works. You can go to church or not go to church, but it's that personal relationship, taking Jesus into your heart and everything else. From an Orthodox perspective, most of the stuff is done through community. That's one of the reasons there's child baptism moving into, because you're literally, as you're born, shortly thereafter, you're introduced into the community of Christians that then is supposed to guide your path from then on. So that gives you a certain amount of this communal perspective being preeminent. And then the other one, it's the singular perspective is preeminent. Obviously, there's smatterings of both, but they approach a similar subject from two different possibilities. Which one do you think, in your experience, makes the more sense within the sacred space structure to function as a good modality for improvement? Community or singular?
You two have some very, very interesting questions here. Don't hate me for the answer being both. Mm-hmm. There's a piece to both that is very critical. You lean upon the community as support, but you don't lean upon the community as a structure, except through your moral compass. Okay. We can get deep into morality and ethics. My personal view on morality and ethics is morality is a structure that we build from what we experience around us. And our ethics are how we operate, how we choose to operate within that moral structure or without it, outside of it. And the ethics is your choice of the inside or the outside of that structure of morality. So your community is very deeply responsible for the moral structure that you are exposed to, that you decide is your moral compass. The individual piece to that is the ethical piece. So I've got my morality. How do I function with my ethics? And if my ethics say that doesn't fit my moral compass, then how do you reconcile that? And that is, there's a bit of ego, and ego not necessarily being a bad thing here. Ego meaning this is what I believe, that ethically, the morality is school zones are 25 miles per hour in most municipalities. But 25 miles an hour, if you're driving down a street with cars parked on both sides, is not enough time to stop if a child runs out between the two cars. So now I'm going to get a whole bunch of people behind me very upset because I'm not going to go and drive 25 miles an hour down a street where I could hit a kid and feel it as a speed bump and never know. That would be bad. My own ethical decision is to not operate within that. Now, that's probably a bad example because you can drive less than 25. You're not supposed to drive over the speed limit. But my point is there's a structure here, and your choice of that ethical piece is to fit within that structure or not. And that ethics is your relationship to the rest of the world at that point. What's my choice? Is my choice going to cause harm? Is my choice going to prevent harm? Is my choice going to do whatever? There's a Machiavellian aspects to it. How much of this is, do bad things so a good thing can happen later? Yeah, I'm not sure I buy into that totally. I get it, but I don't buy into it 100%. There are some cases where it's important. War is a very terrible thing. War is a very terrible thing until you stop somebody like Nazi Germany. That was a critical thing we had to do to stop, in the 40s, the rise of that fascist empire. That had to happen. So communal, individual, communal, what's going on the macro level? Individual, what's going on the micro level? What's going on the individual level? Communal, setting up a sacred space with other people or other pieces to it. Individual, setting up your own individual sacred space to do your own personal work and individual work. There are, if the only ritual that is available to you on a regular basis is a mass or the structure of starting a church service, that's the ritual you should be doing.
Sure.
Yeah. So that is the ritual, the recitation of the pieces in your head, the memorization and the recitation. Is ritual critical? Do you have to be a great ritualist to do everything? No. You got to know the order. You got to know the pieces. You got to be able to roll through those pieces. Every ritual lecturer from whatever tradition out there is going to hate me for saying this, but I don't care if I miss a comma or miss one word or don't say I say and instead of a. I don't care. Because the intent is there, the structure's there, the focus is there. I got 90% of it. And the important piece is there. I opened the sacred space. I invited deity in. I did this with intent. I knew what I was doing when I did it. And that's the important piece to this. So communal is very important. we need that community. Very few people are built that they have that capacity to go live like a hermit in the wilderness. There are a few, right? There are a few of the gurus you hear about climbing up the top of the mountain in the in India and in the East and being gurus, right? And living up in the mountain alone for, in some cases, I guess, hundreds of years, or at least the legends say that.
It seems on some level that you're right, though, Randy, because both in Jesus' case and in Buddha's case, they needed to be alone for a certain amount of time in order for this metamorphosis to sort of take place, right? So Buddha under the Bodhi tree. In fact, this was brought up recently. By the time he got to the Bodhi tree thing, he had given up on enlightenment. He'd said, forget about it. I'm never going to get it. It's not here. It's not there. I don't know where it is. I'm just sitting down under this tree and I'm not moving until something happens. And at that point, he started getting tempted by everything and all that stuff, and finally ends up pointing at the ground and saying, I have a right to be here. And when he did that, then everything sort of changed. Jesus, 33 days or 40 days in the desert, right? Being tempted by this and that, all kinds of the powers of the world, by, being able to win over every kingdom in the world, have whatever he wanted, everything else, and then going. So let me ask you this, since we spoke about this a little bit on the phone yesterday, and without getting too salacious or graphic, there's lots of esoteric organizations out there. They approach it from many different ways. I read a book by Caroline Elliott called Existential Kink. I don't know if you know that one. It's an excellent book, by the way. Really, really good book. It's on magic and how magic can be used in various ways. Obviously, some esoteric organizations employ sex magic, other things like that, things that are outside the normal bounds of what we would think of as a esoteric tradition, especially one focused on enlightenment. Useful, completely self-indulgent, BS. What are we talking about here, Randy?
Okay. So was Hugh Hefner enlightened? I don't know.
You bet your Bippy.
Or were all the playmates enlightened? Who knows?
I doubt it.
Doesn't seem like it.
But what is, anything can be taken to an extreme. And when it's taken to an extreme, it's no longer part of the balance of nature. The whole point of nature is balance. The whole point of extremes are literally out of balance. You got a duality there, which makes perfect sense to those of us who've studied duality, that if you've got balance, then there's stuff that's out of balance. There's always one or the other. And then there's varying degrees of that, right? Think of a pendulum. It goes to a far extreme, comes back to center, goes to the other extreme, goes back to center, back and forth, back and forth. And when we talk about some of these kinks, I like that word. When we talk about some of these kinks that have been explored by some of the various groups in history, I just got a book on this and I have not yet read it, but it talks about basically it's the who did who of the old occult organizations, right, from the 1700s, 1600s, in the early occult realms, who was doing who behind whose back and that kind of thing, because there's quite a bit of that out there. A lot of that is just ego driven, flesh driven, not being in control of your passions, not being in control of your own self and your higher nature, not being able to keep your pants zipped up. And when when the ego gets involved with that, here we go back to the morality and what is the moral structure? Are we stepping through the bounds of the morality? You see that in today's society right now. We see right now there's a young lady who's being celebrated across the internet for starting basically a new sexual revolution because she started talking about oral sex on a viral video, on a video that's gone viral on YouTube and on the internet.
Talking about the Haktua girl?
Absolutely.
Haktua, spit on that thing.
That's right. And when you think about this, is that a socially accepted norm? The answer is yes.
Yeah, sure.
Was it socially accepted 30 years ago? 30 years ago is when we had a certain president in office that took a young intern and closed the doors and kicked the Secret Service out and did some things that he shouldn't have been doing. And it was not a social norm to be talking about that at all.
Right.
Until the next day when it got spread across all the newspapers and every live TV show. And suddenly the term blowjob became a normal word to use on evening news. How's that for wild? 30 some years ago, that couldn't have happened.
No.
But we had a president that made it that way. And when we have that kind of shift in a moral structure, suddenly it's okay to be saying that? Well, in my own personal ethical confrontation and bounds within that, no, it's not probably a good idea to be going around and talking in public about that. But it became open game for all private conversations from then on. Now we've got it out in the actual open public. And the norm has shifted again. Now we've got an ethical piece. Do I talk about this? Do I not? That has now have a moral framework totally shifted across. No. Now we got some thinking to do. Is that a normal thing for people to go around talking about? Man, yeah, it is on the streets. And that framework has shifted. Now we talk about the frameworks across 30 years have shifted dramatically in that one instance. Let's put this back 300 years ago, 400 years ago, when we have these very secret societies doing very secret meetings, very focused work. And you got a couple of them that are, I'm going to say, just buzzing with energy, just happy that they got done with what they got done. And the ritual went well. They didn't forget any words and they got all the little pieces right. And they're just as happy as a clam. And they're all fired up. And in some instances, just glowing with energy, glowing with whatever. But their passions aren't circumscribed. They go out and find a lady of the night or somebody who's willing to go along with it. And they got to release that energy. They got to get rid of that, get rid of those passions or satisfy the desires of the flesh, whatever it is that they're going to do. Well, that feels pretty good. Well, they're going to go do it again. They're going to go do it again. And they're going to find, hey, Alex, hey, David, this was pretty cool. Well, I did this. We got out of the secret secret Captain Decoder Ring Society meeting over here, and I felt all fantastic. Let's go get some girls. Let's go over to the east side. Well, in Missouri we call it the east side. Go over to the east side and find some girls and work this energy off. So it snowballs.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of making use of that energy in a constructive manner, of saying, hey, this felt good, and I'm going to use this energy, and I'm going to keep praying, and I'm going to keep meditating and contemplating and reflecting and seeing what I can do to be better, they go burn it off. Maybe that's not the best way of releasing that energy.